Calder Prime was a planet of scars. Black in stone jutted from the ground like the bones of a long-dead giant, and ash blew sideways in the ceaseless wind. Nothing natural remained, only the ruins of resistance and the echoes of defeat. High above it all, on the jagged ridge overlooking the valley, the commanders of the Galactic Empire stood, laughing. Commander Varish's armor shimmered gold against the pale sky, a ceremonial plate forged from the wreckage of the first world he conquered. His voice carried in the thin air, contempt thick in every word. "So this is where they made their stand," he said, gesturing at the smoldering ruins below. "They thought cliffs would shield them from inevitability." Strategist Qualen chuckled behind his veil of data feeds, his third eye flicking through projections. Primitive positioning. Their terrain advantage was nullified the moment we took orbital control. They cling to dirt like it's sacred. Pathetic. They were always theatrical, added Overseer Vec, thin and insectal, his many limbs folded behind his back. The humans dramatized defeat as if it a form of resistance. The trio shared a hollow amusement, secure in the knowledge that their supremacy was not just military. It was mathematical. The war had been a lesson. Humanity had resisted with surprising tenacity. But resistance was never victory. They were a species of desperate improvisers, scavengers clawing at gods. Their time was over. Far below, beneath fractured ground and scorched machinery, Lieutenant Rhea Morgan lay in silence. Her body was pressed to the floor of a long-buried forward op station, her breath shallow beneath her tactical respirator. The metal walls around her hummed with dormant power. 100 meters above, their enemy laughed. Through the narrow scope of her visor, Rhea focused on the ridge, tagging thermal outlines. Verash, Qualen, Vec, they stood like monarchs. Symbols, targets. She held them in her sight, as if holding their lives in her palm. She did not smile. She did not tremble. These were the monsters who glassed Marseille, who turned oceans to steam, who implanted screaming children with obedience chips. These were the architects of horror, who never once stepped into the fire they made. Her whisper was a blade. "We're still here." To the Empire, Calder Prime was a final sweep, a grave to be polished. But to Rhea, it was a fulcrum, a place where pressure met purpose. Humanity had not retreated. Humanity had burrowed, repurposed, rebuilt. They had transformed defeat into misdirection. "Command," she spoke softly into her neural link. "Ridge position verified. All 3 primaries in scope." A second passed. Then the voice came, gravel in tone, familiar. General Cole, her old instructor, dead to the world, but not to the cause. "Confirm operation status." "Glass storm ready," she said. She thought of her brother, crushed under rubble in the fall of Berlin arcology, of her wife, taken from orbit above Titan, of the names carved into the walls of every secret outpost humanity still held. Each memory was fuel. A soft click sounded in her earpiece. The signal. Execution was now. But even now, as her fingers danced across the activation panel, she looked again at Verash. How easily he laughed, like the suffering of billions was beneath his notice. There was no grandeur in that man, no nobility in his empire, only vanity, built on ash. Above, Verash turned, looking toward the valley as if sensing a change. The wind shifted slightly. The static in his comms turned jagged for half a second. "Report," he said. But there would be no report, only silence, for one moment more, and then the storm would begin. Behind Rhea, deep inside the buried station, ancient cables crackled to life. Subterranean generators hummed, not with power, but with vengeance. Energy flared along quantum filaments laid covertly over the past year by infiltration teams. Resonant frequencies, imperceptible to most, began to converge on a ridge. Rhea whispered 3 numbers aloud. 32.912-0. The console blinked. Glasstorm was armed. She allowed herself one final look through the scope. The generals remained, unmoved, unaware. She didn't hate them. Hate required recognition. This was not about emotion. This was physics. This was the sound of inevitability, reversing course. She pressed the final key. Above her, the ridge remained still for a moment. Then, from nowhere, a soundless ripple of energy sliced through the air. Not light, not sound, something deeper. Verash took a step forward, confusion clouding his face. He touched his temple. Qualen turned, as if hearing something distant. Vex's limbs twitched, then locked. And then, with perfect silence, their skulls fractured. No explosion, no flash, just a sudden, crystalline shattering, as though glass sculptures had been struck by a hammer wielded by God. Their bodies crumpled, headless, to the stone. No warning, no resistance. Rhea didn't move. She waited, confirmed. No signs of shield activation, no survival. Just broken tyrants on a broken world. She exhaled. Glass storm success. Ridge cleared. Around her, a dozen other human cells received the trigger. All across Calder Prime, hidden units prepared to emerge. Guerrilla squads in stealth suits, cybernetic saboteurs, and augmented snipers waited for this moment. The opening blow had been struck. But here, in this moment, Rhea simply watched the Ridge, now silent. The laughter was gone. They had mocked the resistance, called humanity broken. But they forgot. Glass only shatters under pressure. And pressure was what humans did best. She stood, weapon in hand, eyes still locked on the jagged crest. The war had never ended. It had just begun again. A thin line of smoke trailed upward from the Ridge, curling in the brittle air like a question that would never be answered. The bodies lay where they'd fallen, crumpled gold and polished black, now dulled by dust. The Empire's command was dead, and no one had fired a bullet. Lieutenant Rhea Morgan remained still, eyes fixed on the aftermath. Her heart didn't race. This wasn't victory. It was the opening note of something far louder. Confirming detonation vectors, came a voice through the comms, low and metallic. Corporal Dallin, her tech officer. Resonant kill pattern stable. Target matter liquefied at the cranial core. Zero bleed effect. Containment ideal. Copy, Rhea replied. Move to Phase 2. A pulse of light flickered beneath her feet as the forward op station switched from camouflage to active broadcast. Veins of circuitry lit up like old arteries rediscovering blood. Deep within, automated hatches hissed open, releasing teams of human soldiers armored in matte gray plating, low profile, sensor-resistant. They didn't speak. Words were unnecessary now. Across the shattered surface of Calder Prime, similar awakenings occurred. Buried assault pods cracked open like insect shells. Camouflage watchpoints blinked to life. From beneath ruins, from collapsed tunnels, from beneath the very boots of the Empire's remaining forces, the ghosts of humanity rose. The Empire didn't know how many humans had survived the last siege. They thought resistance had been snuffed out in the orbital bombardments. They were wrong. Visual on Eastern Platoon, said Dallin. 17 hostiles. Mostly infantry. Disorganized. Looks like their command net's down. Good, Rhea said, checking her rifle. Keep them confused. She emerged from the op station, the blast doors parting with a low groan. Dust wrapped around her like a cloak as she took her first steps above ground in 3 weeks. The air was sharp with static, the scent of scorched alloy still clinging to the rocks. Through her visor, she saw the Ridge, quiet now, stripped of its menace. Around her, her squad surfaced, silent and focused. Sergeant Kyra took point, her frame broader than the others, scars etched into her armor like tallies. Her eyes caught Rhea's for a moment, the briefest flicker of approval. Their comms are in disarray, Kyra said. We hit hard, they'll scatter. They'll regroup, Rhea replied. This is just panic. The real fight comes after the shock wears off. She was right. Already, in the valley below, surviving Empire forces were scrambling for cohesion. Without their commanders, the drones defaulted contingency algorithms, jerky and uncertain. Mid-rank officers shouted conflicting orders, signals overlapping and distorting. A war machine with its head cut off, still twitching. And yet it was still dangerous. Deploy suppression lines, Rhea ordered. Dallin launched a pair of aerial nodes into the sky. Small spheres, humming softly as they scattered interference, burst across enemy frequencies. Instantly, several Empire drones halted mid-step, unsure. Others turned, confused by contradictory signals, firing on their own allies. The chaos deepened. Rhea moved quickly now, her boots kicking up fine layers of grit. Her squad advanced behind her, their weapons sleek and silent. They didn't rush. Every movement was calculated. They were not here to make noise. They were here to end things. They reached the edge of a collapsed pipeline where a group of Empire soldiers had taken cover. Rhea gave the signal. Kyra lobbed a silent EMP grenade, the device hissing as it arced. A pulse snapped through the air. The soldiers collapsed mid-sentence, twitching, disabled. No blood, no glory, just precision. They moved on. The Empire had always relied on shock and awe. Show up, dominate, instill fear. But they never prepared for ghosts, never trained for silence, for shadows that struck with surgical intent. This was humanity reborn, not as rebels, but as tacticians. On the ridge, from where the generals had once watched the world burn, silence still held. No rescue teams, no retaliation, just dust settling on what had once been infallible. Word would take time to reach the outer garrisons. In that gap, humanity would write a new story. Update, Dallin said. Western flank reports heavy resistance. Armored walkers still active. Send in the javelin squads. Rhea answered. Tell them to aim for the knee joints. Then vanish. Far in the distance, small booms echoed. Moments later, pillars of smoke rose in pairs. A cheer crackled through the comms, quickly silenced by discipline. There would be time for celebration later. Rhea climbed a ledge that offered a wider view of the valley. What she saw stirred no joy, only resolve. The Empire's troops were trying to form ranks. Field officers had taken control of units. They were laying down suppressive fire, pulling back toward a fortified outpost. It wouldn't be long before they regrouped. We've got 1 hour, maybe less, Kyra said beside her. We won't need that long, Rhea said. A new signal lit up on her HUD. An encoded burst from command. Not a full message. Just a phrase, pulsing in red. Collapse point, imminent. This was it. The fulcrum moment. All the years of hiding, bleeding, sacrificing, all of it narrowed to this crack in time. One push, one storm. Then the Empire would have to blink. Push east, Rhea ordered. Flank and cut their fallback corridor. Dallin, get me eyes on the command outpost. If they've got reserves waiting, I want them blind before they move. As her team moved out, the ground beneath her trembled faintly. Distant artillery warming up. The Empire was waking up. The shock was fading. Their size, their power, it was coming back into play. But so was humanity's fury. Rhea descended the ledge with measured steps, rifle ready. There was no room for hesitation now. No mercy. The heads on the ridge had shattered like glass. And with them, the illusion of invincibility. Now came the breaking of the body. The air above Calder Prime's ridge hung still, unnaturally so, as if the planet itself were holding its breath. Where once the Empire's highest officers had stood in triumphant derision, now only their broken forms remained, gold armor fractured, black blood staining the stone. The silence was no longer a product of awe or fear. It was the absence of command, the vacuum left by a severed mind. Down in the valley, the Empire's forces scrambled for coherence. Lieutenants barked overlapping orders into failing comms, attempting to rally panic units as drone squadrons hovered in aimless loops, awaiting logic that no longer existed. The field AI protocols, relying on command validation, had collapsed into self-diagnostics. What had once been a synchronized assault force now flailed like a wounded beast, dangerous but confused. From a blackened overlook halfway up the canyon wall, Rhea Morgan watched it all unfold. Her visor glinted faintly, reading infrared signatures and movement trails, calculating trajectories like second nature. Her squad was split into vanguard cells now, spreading through chaos like control burn. Targets were selected, neutralized, and discarded without ceremony. This was no longer resistance. This was reclamation. Dallin's voice came soft and steady over the channel. Local net integrity reduced to 22%. Multiple enemy nodes folding in on each other. We're triggering a cascade. Good, Rhea replied. Let them collapse from the inside. Beneath her boots, the ridge pulsed faintly. Residual energy from the glass storm strike still dissipating into the bedrock. The technology had been experimental, built in desperation, reverse engineered from the very implants the Empire once used to enslave human minds. It was cruelly poetic. They'd used their own science to fracture the skulls of their gods. Kyra reappeared beside her, a splash of soot across her helmet. Her armor bore new scars, fresh from an engagement near the Empire's western fallback point. She crouched low, breath steady. They're cracking. Morale's disintegrating fast, she said. They're broadcasting distress signals, but we're jamming 90%. The rest? Screams, mostly. Rhea nodded. Fear spreads faster than sound. Let them scream. From orbit to ground, the Galactic Empire had ruled through the illusion of permanence. Their banners were never just fabric. They were symbols of inevitability, of the futility of resistance. But now the lie was laid bare, and even the lowest foot soldiers could feel it. They weren't unbreakable. They weren't gods. They were vulnerable. And vulnerability, when seen in an oppressor, was a contagion. Multiple allied insurgencies reporting in, Dallin added. Uprisings on 3 moons, Delta IV Lasari and Volar's Edge. Looks like the transmission got out. Rhea exhaled slowly, not quite a sigh. They saw the ridge. Yeah, Kyra said. The whole galaxy did. It had taken less than 10 seconds. A signal hijacked from an old Empire relay station, piggybacked on a decrypted fleet channel. A perfect image. 3 Imperial commanders, motionless in triumph. Then a flicker. Then glass and bone. Then nothing. Broadcast once, then looped. The message was not subtle. It didn't need to be. Across occupied worlds, those images struck like lightning in a drought. Species that had knelt for generations now rose with trembling fists. Quiet rebellions bloomed into roaring defiance. The Empire's ships still darkened skies, but now every eye looked up with a question. If they can bleed, why should we obey? But revolution had a price. Rhea knew that better than most. She glanced across the ridge again, eyes lingering on Varish's remains. He had once stood before a conquered Earth, smug and invincible, dictating terms through translators who flinched at his breath. He'd never known fear, never known loss. Now he knew silence. She turned to Kyra. How many civilians on Calder? Unknown, Kyra said. Scanners picked up movement in Sector 12. Could be survivors. Could be traps. Send a recon unit. Quiet. Non-lethal protocols. If they're ours, we bring them home. There was a moment's hesitation, then a nod. Orders were orders, but Rhea's were always given with something more. Not softness. Not mercy. Precision. She knew what was to lose too much, and she'd be damned if this victory birthed only more ghosts. A new ping lit her HUD. Down again. Movement at the eastern escarpment. Empire transport lifting off. No escort. Looks like a VIP evac. Rhea's pulse quickened, but her tone remained level. Priority intercept. I want the passenger alive. Copy that. Kyra was already moving, signaling 2 strike teams through the encoded line. Rhea followed, boots crunching over scorched gravel, the sound swallowed by wind. They reached a new overlook just as the transport crested the horizon, a sleek black vessel with Empire insignia still pristine. As if trying to pretend none of this had happened, Rhea raised her scope. The pilot wore standard fleet armor, but the figure seated in the rear compartment wore ceremonial silver, intelligence cast. Not a commander, a chronicler, someone sent not to lead, but to remember. They're trying to preserve the narrative, Rhea murmured. They want a witness to rewrite the truth, to twist what happened here into propaganda. Do we take them out? Kyra asked. No, we make them talk. The order was clear. No further questions. A single rail round punctured the vessel's starboard engine. Smoke poured into the sky as the ship listed violently and skidded into the dust below, crashing behind a curtain of black debris. Rhea stood at the edge of the ridge, watching the flames rise. She didn't smile. There was no joy in collapse, only necessity. Behind her, Calder Prime trembled, not from fear, but from memory stirring in the bones of the planet. The war wasn't over. Not yet, but for the first time, it was no longer a war of survival. It was a reckoning, and reckoning had a long, merciless memory. The wrecked Empire transport lay like a wounded animal at the base of the ridge, smoke seeping from ruptured seams in its once gleaming hull. Heat shimmered above the fractured plating, and the twin crescent moons overhead cast ghost-pale light onto the wreckage. The silver insignia of the Galactic Empire was barely visible now, melted, twisted, almost ashamed to still be recognized. Around it, nothing moved but the wind. Lieutenant Rhea Morgan moved in with precision, each step deliberate on the scorched gravel. Her rifle remained low, but her attention was razor-honed, her eyes sweeping the contours of the crash site with disciplined calm. Behind her, Kyra and two other veterans from the vanguard spread out in a crescent formation, securing the site with ghost-like silence. No chatter, no uncertainty. They had done this before. Extraction, evaluation, elimination. And in the center of the debris, crawling from the wreck like a relic of forgotten theology, was Minister Delos. His ceremonial robes were half-burned, the embedded circuitry blinking in erratic spasms. One eye was swollen shut in blood, bright red, betraying his fully human origin despite his Empire loyalties, dripped in thin lines down his temple. He coughed as he tried to stand, hands trembling, data tablet clutched like a sacred object. He didn't look like an archivist. He looked like the past personified, fragile, confused, obsolete. Rhea stood over him. "You should have killed me in the wreck," Delos rasped. "It would have made things simpler." She didn't blink. "I'm not interested in simple." He met her gaze with defiance, the kind that comes not from courage but from long habit. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," she said. "You don't hold a weapon. You don't command troops. You tell stories. That makes you the most dangerous man alive." He flinched, not from her words, but from their truth. "I'm a chronicler. My role is to preserve. You revise," Rhea cut in. "You sterilize. Every burned city becomes a necessary purge. Every shattered moon becomes a containment success. You shape the horror into legend." "I contextualize chaos into understanding," he said weakly. "No," Rhea said, stepping closer. "You silence pain. That's what the Empire does best. Makes memory into myth." Kyra appeared behind her, sight secured. No secondary signals. Crash isolated. "Get him on his feet," Rhea ordered. Kyra grabbed Delos by the elbow and hauled him upright. The chronicler cried out, more from surprise and pain, and stumbled, clutching his tablet like a lifeline. Dallin's voice buzzed softly over the squad's private channel. "Command tower's ours. They left it running. Probably didn't think we'd make it that far." "Of course they didn't," Rhea said. "They never think we're real until we've already cut their throat." She turned to the minister again. "You're going to help us tell a better story. The real one." He laughed, short and bitter. "You think a signal burst will dismantle the Empire? That a speech will crack a regime built on millennia of conquest?" "No," Rhea said. "I think truth spreads faster than fire. And this place is already dry." They marched him to Command Tower, past the corpses of his own people, officers in their crimson and black dress, bodies still warm. Inside, the tower pulsed with pale green light. The console was intact, its interface now speaking the sharp, clipped dialect of Earth's old rebel code. Dallin's doing. The broadcast relays blinked, waiting for input. Screens across the wall flickered to life, showing ready signals on every available channel. Hundreds of receivers stood open, ships in orbit, colonies on distant moons, even hidden bunkers in asteroid belts. The message would not be censored. Not this time. Rhea stood before the console. The transmission light glowed a soft red, recording but not yet transmitting. She stared at her reflection in the glass. Dusty armor, cracked visor at her hip, hair matted against her scalp from hours in the helmet. No insignia, no medals, just truth. Dallin gave her a small nod. "You're live in 5 seconds." She breathed in, just once, Then the red light blinked green. Across the galaxy, on screens in slave camps and broken cities, in back rooms where rebels hid, and in quarters where Empire loyalists drank themselves numb, her face appeared. She didn't look heroic. She looked tired, honest. "My name is Lieutenant Rhea Morgan," she said, voice even, "and I have no flag, no world to call mine, just a memory of one." Behind her, a video played in silence, just a loop of the ridge. 3 Empire commanders, standing proud. Then the pulse, then their heads, bursting like shattered crystal. The loop ended on stillness. "I was born under occupation," Rhea continued. "I was raised in ash. I lost my family before I knew how to say their names. I was told to obey, that they were too strong, too eternal. But we learned something." She looked straight into the lens. "They can bleed. They can fall. They can be erased." The footage changed again. Silent shots of rebel cells on Calder, taking over towers, of drone carriers being dismantled by improvised explosives, of prisoners freed from mines. "We are not alone," she said. "You are not alone. And if you can hear this, then you already know the silence is broken." In a monitoring room aboard a warship orbiting Volar's edge, an officer dropped his glass. In a prison beneath the salt mines of Delta IV, inmates began screaming, not in fear, but in joy. Across half a dozen moons, 1,000,000 hearts skipped at once. "This is not the end of the Empire," Rhea said, "but it is the beginning of its reckoning." She stepped back. The signal cut. Silence followed, heavy and wide. In the tower, Dallin exhaled shakily. "It's done." "No," Rhea said quietly, looking out across the valley. "It started." Below, the wind shifted direction. The fires had gone out, and the stars had begun to burn just a little brighter. The Empire would answer. Of course it would. But this time, humanity wasn't waiting. They were coming, and their laughter, once buried in the ground, now echoed from the ridge like thunder.